Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and I'm here with the second of my little series of videos I'm doing for Victober 2024 about the Victorian theatre and Victorian playwrights. And last time it was Oscar Wilde. This time it's probably the most successful and influential Victorian playwright that you haven't heard of. Oh, well, some of you will have done, but certainly a relatively much less known playwright than the figures of the 1890s that we know so well, like Wilde and Shaw, and even sort of Arthur Pinero, say. And his name, or one of his names, shall we say, is Dion Boucicault. And he, as I say, was one of probably the most successful actor, playwright, theatre manager, producer of the Victorian era, working in both the UK and the US. And he wrote more than 150 plays. He was known for bringing a kind of sensation to the theatre, dramatic events in a play where perhaps someone is close to death and then something happens to save them, a big spectacular kind of theatrical piece of stagecraft. For example, in one play, he brought on a fire engine to put out a fire and save the hero. He kind of changed the sense of how the Irish could be portrayed in the theatre, with three of his plays in particular. He introduced fireproof scenery. Well, obviously he needed it. He was going to bring on fire engines. What else? He was crucial in the development of copyright in the US for playwrights, and in the UK campaigned successfully for the concept of royalties. Playwrights being paid something for every performance of every time one of their plays was put on, rather than a fixed fee, say, which really disadvantaged playwrights if their plays were successful. Many things. But the other thing that we should say about Dion is that his life was as colourful as his plays, just as sensational, shall we say. So I'm going to tell you a little story. Settle down and make yourself comfortable. Little story of his life, and then talk about two of his plays which I've read this October. So he was born in 1820 in Dublin. He's Irish. His mother, Anne, was married to a slightly older man, a wine merchant called Samuel Boursicot. So Dion's original name when he was born was Dionysius Lardner Boursiquot, his mother's husband's surname. But it's pretty certain that he wasn't actually Boursicot's son. His actual blood father was, we think, Dionysius Lardner, hence his name. He was named after his real father, Dionysius Lardner. Lardner was a scientist, a lecturer, an academic. He was lodging with Anne at the time. She was sort of recently separated from her husband. And a few years later, she goes to live in London with Lardner and takes Dion and some of her other children with her. So, an interesting start to life, shall we say. And Lardner seems to have, supported him sort of right up until he was in his 20s. And he went to various schools, and it was while he was at school that he got the acting bug and, an enthusiasm for the theatre. He was involved in a production. He took a lead role. He wrote, a sequel to that to be performed after it. He really, he thought this was where he wanted to go. But of course, his family did not approve. Although the theatre was popular in Victorian times, it wasn't necessarily seen as a respectable occupation. And they decided he should be apprenticed to become a civil engineer instead. Did this suit young Dion? No, not at all. And he abandons that and starts as a sort of amateur and then a semi-professional actor in the provinces, in Gloucester and Brighton and various places, and starts to carve out a life. He immediately starts writing plays as well as performing in them. He wrote about sort of 3 or 4 before he was 20. None of those were successful, mind you. But in 1840, his mother kind of packs him off back to Dublin to work as a clerk in the brewery of his, belonging to his cousin Arthur Guinness, famous beer, Guinness family. Now, it's not entirely clear, but it seems that Dion got into a relationship with Arthur, and certainly not that long afterwards, he's back in London with money, and it seems like the family may have kind of like paid him off and sent him away. It's a little unclear, but that's what appears to have happened. So there he is in London. He gets back into the theatres. He possibly went to a kind of theatre school at that point. He's 20, turning 21. At the age of 21, he has his first significant hit as a playwright. So he's been writing plays, he's performing in plays. He performed in 1840, I think, in the late 1830s, a version of Nicholas Nickleby, the Dickens book that was made into a play at the time. So he was on the stage, but his first successful production of a play of his own was London Assurance, which was put on in London in 1841 and was a definite hit. It actually made him a decent return, but he was living way beyond his means right from the start. And in 1842, he had his first bankruptcy. He was bankrupted at least 3 times in his life, possibly 4. He had a bit of a nose for trouble, shall we say, in every possible way. He went to France after becoming bankrupt, sort of looking for more inspiration for plays to write. He wrote a number of sort of adaptations or translations and adaptations of French plays. But he found another solution to his money troubles in 1845 because he married a wealthy French widow. Her name was Anne Guillot. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately for him, Anne, he claimed, died that same year in a rather mysterious mountaineering accident in the Swiss Alps. There's been sort of ongoing speculation as to what extent he had a hand in her death, and whether she actually died that year or whether it was a few years later. Who knows? As I say, his life was as sensational as his work. By 1850, though, there he is, in his coming up for 30, back in London, working in the theatre in London again. And at one point, he's working with Charles Keane, who was one of the premier sort of actors and theatre managers of the day. Working with Keane, he met one of the most successful young actresses of the day. Her name was Agnes Robertson. She'd been a child actor. And then at this point, she was Keane's ward. Keane was her guardian, and she was working for and with him. But she and Dion got a bit of a thing going. Keane was not keen about it, shall we say. And Agnes went to America to do some performances there. Dion follows straight after, 2 weeks later, and they are married, or they have some kind of civil ceremony that was legal in the States at that time. You have to bear in mind that she was not yet 21 at this point, and so she didn't have the right to, get married in the UK without her. She wouldn't have had the right to get married without her guardian's permission, but they were able to get married, having sort of, in effect, eloped to America. She's performing there as an actor. She's more successful than he is at this stage, but he's also performing. He's writing plays. He's trying to become a bit of a theatre manager, impresario. He takes leases on various theatres that are not altogether successful, but he has some successful plays. Most notable in this period, and he was there from 1854 to 1860 at this point, was a play called The Octoroon, which was put on in 1859 and was like the first play to really address the Black American slave experience. It was an anti-slavery play. It not much talked about now, but at the time, it and Uncle Tom's Cabin, that came out 3 years later, were, the book, were seen as, the two key kind of anti-slavery pieces of fiction that were helping to influence attitudes to enslavement. He and Agnes both performed in the original production, as well as he having written it and produced it, but he got into a squabble with the manager of the theatre over how much they were getting paid, and they're both sort of tossed out of it. He also manages to fall out with his business partner that he's trying to run theatres with, and ends up coming back to the UK in 1860. By this stage, he and Agnes have 3 children, and they have another 3 in when they're back in the UK. In 1860, he writes and produces his most successful play of all, and that's called The Colleen Bawn. And it's an Irish play, an Irish setting, set in rural Ireland with Irish characters of all classes. It was a big hit in the US and in the UK, performed all around the country, in both countries. I think the first performance was in America, but it was equally popular over here. He made a fortune from The Colleen Bawn, but managed to lose it in his endless, unsuccessful sort of business ventures running theatres. He was bankrupt again in 1863, but that was not just about unsuccessful business ventures. That was about the fact that he was named in the divorce proceedings of an actress called Mrs. Jordan. And essentially, he seems to have had been successively unfaithful to poor old Agnes over the years. And as I say, that caused, just after his most successful play ever, an episode of financial ruin. But each time he pulls himself back from the brink with his phenomenally productive playwriting, and because he was acting in most of these plays, and because he's pushing for getting better remuneration as a playwright, as I said. He was to write two more kind of Irish plays that are 2 of his most successful and most well thought of plays. Aaron na Pogue in 1864 and The Shaughraun in 1874. And those 2 were based around the United Irish Rebellion and the Fenian Uprising. So, they've got a more political content. He sort of was known for performing kind of almost comedy Irish roles in plays, but also, these were important in sort of developing sympathy for the Irish cause. Supposedly, Disraeli released a load of Irish Fenian prisoners from detention, having watched The Shaughraun. So, yeah. What an interesting man, with all this that he's, on the one hand, disgraceful personal life, but with this successful professional life, and writing some plays that are kind of like potboilers and others that are, politically and socially significant. So where are we? In 1875, he's back in America, in New York, Why? Well, one key reason was the American actress that he was having a long affair with at that point, and he's basically sort of moves back to be with her. In 1876, he and Agnes have a personal tragedy. Their son, Dion Jr., young Dion, was killed in a railway accident, and that can't have helped their marriage, quite apart from all his sort of, say, extended infidelities. She starts moving for divorce, but they're reconciled. It goes to and fro. Around this time, he's touring. And as is she, despite having 6 children, in Canada, America, Australia. Getting around. While he's in Australia, he takes up with a young Australian actress, Louise. What's her surname? Louise Thorndike. And in 1885, at the grand old age of 65, he finally leaves Agnes and marries, potentially bigamously, the 21-year-old Louise. Agnes does now pursue a divorce. In 1888, she's successful. It's, as I say, it's confusing because he claimed that they were never properly married because, it was this American civil ceremony, but it was legal, and, that divorce causes yet another of his bankruptcies. He doesn't live much longer. He never really recovers from this. This one is becoming unsuccessful. Although he's apparently very happy with Louise, he's becoming less successful in his work. I guess, fashions are changing, and he dies in 1890 and is buried in New York, in America. So, in the 1870s, about 1873, he'd taken American citizenship, as had Agnes, in fact. So, he was sort of went between the two, I suppose. So that was the end of his extraordinarily colourful life. I think I said that he wrote more than 150 plays, and obviously they are of variable quality, but there are some really good ones in there, I would say. And I've watched or read, or both, 2 before making this, and to kind of get a taste of this playwright that I'd barely heard of, but was such a big name in Victorian times. Queen Victoria loved him. Went to his plays repeatedly, apparently. The Colleen Bawn he went to 3 times. Now, the Colleen Bawn is one of the 2 that I chose to read. And those 2 were London Assurance, his first big hit in 1841, and the Colleen Bawn, which was kind of like his biggest hit of all, probably. And what did I make of them? London Assurance is a 5-act comedy. It is genuinely extremely funny, I think. It harks back, I suppose, to the style of 18th century comedies, things like Sheridan's A School for Scandal, say, that or The Rivals, that type of play. You've got a kind of culture clash between the foppish city upper classes and the country gentry. So our sort of the lead character, I suppose, is Sir Courtney Harcourt, who's a London fop. But he goes to London to marry a young heiress that he's been sort of betrothed to, and has been waiting for her to come of age before he could marry her for financial reasons. But when he gets to this country area, he meets one of her neighbours, Lady Gay Spanker, who's a hunting, horse riding kind of enormous character, and rather falls for her. So it's a story of meanwhile his son is falling for the young woman that the father was meant to marry. So you've got marriage for money, you've got true love, you've got sexual attraction, you've got kind of caricature characters like the provincial lawyer who's out to looking to try and get people to sue each other so he can make a profit. Enormously witty dialogue, and some elements of sort of genuinely sort of poignant moments of emotion, but mostly just farce, and a really, really wild ride. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I read it. I also watched the National Theatre at Home sort of video of a production from about 10 years ago with Simon Russell Beale and Fiona Shaw. Watching it, genuine belly laughs, I have to say. So, one to consider. The other that I read was the Colleen Bawn from 1860. Now, very different sort of play. This is much more at his sort of melodramatic, relatively sensational sort of style of play. It's got love again, and secrets and misunderstandings and murderous plans and people and sort of dramatic deaths, but people being perhaps snatched from the jaws of death, something he was known for. Why was it so popular? Well, all that drama, of course, but also it's got tremendous characters. And you've got these sort of interlinked and intertwining and confusing love stories going on between these different characters. But what I think made it particularly enjoyable then and still now is that he built into the play all the different sort of layers of Irish society at the time, in rural Ireland. So you've got the landowning classes, and they're Irish but kind of a bit Anglo-Irish. They use more English style, pronunciation and vocabulary. You've got the sort of but they're falling on hard times. You've got the middling kind of sort of Irish background person who's been working as like a steward and then as perhaps as a lawyer, and is making money and sort of lending money to the landowners, and he's that character's like the bad guy in this story, made out to be the baddie. And then you've got the Irish kind of peasant classes, who they're speaking either in Irish or with kind of a difference of vocabulary and accent and sort of dialect words. He builds that into the dialogue of the play, and songs, like kind of Irish style folk songs built in, and it's juicy, it's thrilling, it comes to a dramatic denouement. It's the kind of play where people, hide in caves where people are brewing moonshine, illegal whiskey stills. It has a drunken Catholic Irish priest. It's got, you name it, all thrown in, but in a way that holds together and is an enjoyable watch. So, he based it on a novel he read, The Collegian, which he picked up and wrote the play within a week, I think. But the book was from 1829 and by someone called Gerald Griffin. But that was based on a true story of a murder of a 15-year-old Irish girl who was married to someone of a higher class, but who realised that his family, she was very pretty, but his family were never going to accept her, and he plans to have her killed to free himself from this sort of foolish in his family's eyes marriage. I think I would recommend either of them as a play to read or to watch. He's not, when you watch London Assurance, you can see where someone like Oscar Wilde kind of, where his society kind of comedies like, The Importance of Being Earnest, where they kind of grow out of, that sort of tradition of the farce, or Charlie's Aunt by Brandon Thomas say, they come from the sort of London Assurance sort of tradition. that Boucicault is writing in, then the plays like the Colleen Bawn, you're getting a real the kind of Victorian love of a sensational story and a melodrama, and what's not to love about that still. So I've given you an introduction to, as I say, the most successful Victorian playwright you've probably not heard of. But if you've read or watched any of his other plays, I would love to hear about it. Is there another one that I should perhaps read? Should I read The Shoren, or is there another that you'd recommend? And maybe go and have a go at reading or watching one of these. As I say, I would particularly recommend the National Theatre at Home's production of London Assurance.